Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'm very happy to be on and honored to be here today. I must say that I should begin with a confession that I'm not a journalist nor a media person. I'm actually a doctor by training, but I've written more or less the press releases and prescriptions in equal numbers because mostly last 30 years, I've been working on the front lines in humanitarian settings. I'll come to you in a moment. So I want to welcome you all, those who are in the room, as well as those who are joining online. This story will change your life. That's a topic we are going to discuss today, especially how to report constructively, building on solution-oriented reporting that the first panel dealt with, especially looking at issues that affect girls and women. What a great and relevant topic, I would say. You know, if you pan the camera to what is unfolding in Libya, what's unfolding in Ukraine, at the Venezuelan-Colombian border, plus in almost every hunger zone, we will recognize how critical it is to tell the stories of girls and women, and most importantly, not just to talk about them, how do we actually amplify their voices? So we have an exciting panel, and I know that they are very well experienced, but they are also very passionate about the topic which we are discussing today. So feel free to move away from your employer's party line and editorial line when you share your experiences. And we are looking forward to listening to each one of you. We have about 75 minutes. And what we plan to do is that I also have a set of questions. We will begin with some questions to each of the panel members, but we won't wait for all the questions to be over to take some questions or comments from you and those who are joining online. Thank you for making arrangements to take inputs from those who are joining online. And please don't be afraid. Ask tough questions because they usually put us on a tight spot when they're on the other side of the camera. Then finally, before I forget, I also want to thank One World Media for this exciting opportunity, the Australian High Commission and my own colleagues from Plan International for setting up this particular session. My name is Unni Krishnan. That's my actual name. It's not an acronym for another UN organization. That's my real name. And I work mostly on the front lines, and I currently work as the Global Humanitarian Director for Plan International. And this topic is very close to our heart. Of course, we work with every child and all children, but we are also increasingly recognizing the differential impact on girls and women in crisis settings. So I'm going to go to the first speaker, and they will introduce themselves first, each one of them. Then we will go to the questions. So let me start with Ruth. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And a very good morning. It's almost going into the afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. And thank you very much for taking time to be here with us this morning. My name is Ruth Nesoba. I am the current regional deployments and news gathering editor, BBC East Africa. I also serve as the vice president of the Kenya Editors Guild. So all editors here, nawasalimia wote, and thank you so much. Hello, thank you. I appreciate you. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. And I've worked through it all, you know, reporter, producer, presenter, and now currently watching over news gathering and deployments for the BBC in one of the busiest patches on the continent, East Africa. So we watch over, you know, the Great Lakes, Horn of Africa, East Africa itself, and down into Southern Africa. We'll discuss more in the discussions that are starting. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruth. I'll go to Dorcas now.
Good morning. My name is Dorcas Moga Odumbe, gender editor at Nation Media Group, and also contributing editor to the Fuller Project, an organization based in the US that solely reports on women and girls. So of course, I love where I am at the moment. I love the topic, very passionate about women. Prior to joining Nation Media Group, I worked at the Standard Group and did quite a bit with women. We had a forum called the Eve Sisters that we held every month, where we'd gather women and pick on topics that touch on them, women and girls, and discuss. We'd go to schools, speak to girls, and just inspire them, motivate them. So I'm very passionate about what we are doing currently, and I look forward to a lively session. Please ask questions, but don't ask very tough questions. Some are a bit difficult to answer rather, especially considering where I work. If that question comes up, then I'll tell you what it is that I can't talk about, given the place where I work. But thank you very much, and I look forward to this session.
Thank you, Dorcas. And we go to Lourdes Walusala.
Oh, and I forgot to say, sorry, before I joined the standard group, I was a teacher. I taught at the Alliance Girls High School. And I'm very proud to say that one of my students is, I think she's the MC, Frenny. Yeah, I taught Frenny. She went to Alliance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lourdes Walusala. I see most of my students here. In my other life, I'm a digital rights activist. We talk about digital safety. So today we are talking about storytelling. I change my kofiyas often. I am an award-winning radio journalist. I'm passionate about health, women, and children. While I was accepting this invitation, I was working with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, KBC, Baba na Mama, sisi ndio tuko. But I transitioned slightly, some 2-3 weeks ago, I transitioned. Currently, I work for Lifebox. This is a global NGO that advocates for safer surgery. The World Anesthesia Day is coming, so I'll be pitching some stories. I see some journalists here. Yeah. Outside formal employment, I'm also an active member of the Association of Media Women in Kenya, Femnet, and IWAT. You're welcome to join. I'm so happy we are speaking about this today. I'm passionate about solution-focused storytelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. And finally, we have Caroline Kimeu.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. It's so lovely to be here. And we're looking forward to really engaging with the audience on this really, really important subject of coverage on girls and women. So I'm the East Africa correspondent for The Guardian, covering development, which is in a very broad scope. Development, including climate issues, including politics, including technology. In all of these areas, I've done stories focused on women, and that's involved looking at the different layers in which women are affected. And I think having this panel here, my peers for whom I have great respect, and all of us here being Black African women, and understanding intrinsically what that means for our lived experiences, would enable us to engage on this issue, not only as professionals, but on a personal level too. So we look forward to the hard questions as well, and where we can't answer in our capacities as, the positions we hold, we'll answer as people, we'll answer as reporters as well, just doing this hard work every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Let's give a big round of applause to all our panel members. Thank you very much for being with us today. And I can see that the wealth of their experience and different expertise they have, experts who are sending their correspondents to the field, who are covering specialist stories, to those who are in a bit of a transition, but covering on both sides, as well as some round of, I would say, more progressive journalism to some extent. So I'm going to get in the first question. That's about gender-sensitive reporting. Imagine for a minute, wherever you were yesterday or wherever you are going to be tomorrow this time, we know that tonight, about 870 million people will go to bed hungry. And you're going to hear a range of things that has been complicating or making it difficult to cover critical issues such as the economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Then there are issues around the climate breakdown, then also conflict. But tonight, about 870 million people will go to bed hungry. And if you put all the hungry people in the world in a single place, that will be the third most populous country after China and India. And even when we talk about hunger crisis, when we get very limited coverage, the voice we often don't hear are of the girls and women. So my first question to the panelists is about gender-sensitive reporting. That is, this is very much essential, but we know it's very challenging. So what are some of the current pitfalls in this line of reporting, and how can journalists avoid these pitfalls? Let me start with Caroline.
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about gender-sensitive reporting, the reason it looks like something that could be intrinsic, that people would just look at an issue and see the layers of ways in which people are affected. But I think it's important to see this as a skill that can be built over time. When you're looking at why gender-sensitive reporting is important, you need to think about it beyond the headlines. There's this drought, there's this conflict, you know, there is the climate crisis. What does that mean for women living through these situations? This is extremely different. And, you know, I'm going to talk about intersectionality a bit, but for those who are not aware of the concept, intersectionality is understanding women in the range and breadth of ways they exist. I'm not in the same position, for instance, as a farmer, as a person living in an informal settlement. So it's kind of trying to understand, how do women, when it comes to different categories of race, different categories of economic class, exist, and how are they affected by the different issues? So when it comes to gender sensitive reporting, the reason it's important is because as women, we know that we are exposed to very dangerous situations when conflict plays out, when climate change plays out. One of my interviewees was saying, this doesn't just mean harder conditions environmentally. This means more children might, you know, families are having a harder time getting along financially, and that might mean more early marriages. That might mean more precarious situations for women, being exposed to sexual violence. But I think the most important thing is to make these links in the reporting, to step back a little bit from the headlines and not let that direct how we move with the reporting, but rather to look and have conversations with the people we're interviewing in a way that meets them where they are, in a way that ask questions that allow them to give you a bit more of a sense of their reality. So intersectional reporting is super important. Understanding a story not from your own lens, but from the person you're speaking to, and the different ways that would play out as far as social barriers, economic barriers, etc.
Karen, that was great, especially a point you made that this is a skill that you can build. I'm sure that some youngsters in the room will be very keen to know how do you build that skill, but we'll come to that point in a minute. Lourdes, how has this been impacting your work, or what's your take on this?
Thank you very much for that. I can say from a journalist perspective, I have seen both extremes. One extreme is tokenism, including the voice of women because we just want to include, we want to appear inclusive. You have called a panel in the on our TV, and then it's 6, and that panel is supposed to go on air at 7 p.m. and then you are like, oh shit, oh sorry, you're like, oh, we have 5 men, we need 1 woman. And you know, that's when now you will call a woman at 6:30. And definitely as a mother, I will not appear because who will be taking care of my, I have to ensure that everything on the home front is, you know, set for me to come. So you will definitely end up with a panel that is not representative because tokenism, we just wanted to include them for the sake of including and not for that meaningful conversation. Another extreme is underrepresentation. There are times you are called somewhere and you see, I was actually called to go and discuss something, and I found it was a panel of 5 men discussing about menstrual hygiene. You are talking about something that involves women, but the women are not there. Underrepresentation. Those are 2 extremes that I feel, yeah, those are pitfalls. And as journalists, we have to be really intentional. First of all, we have to integrate authentically, not just as a by the way, this panel has to be, you know, we must have all the voices here. So call that woman, call that one. And in groups where I am a member, like Amwik, we make a lot of noise, by the way. Sometimes we take a screenshot and we say, these are manels, you know, and we call the journalists out. And we started a Google Doc with names and contacts of possible female experts. If you need an expert, consult this Google Doc. Instead of, you know, you're going to talk about menstrual hygiene and the women are not represented. Thank you.
So thank you, Lourdes, and thank you also for being honest. So it's not just about planning, but intentional about how you change those who are going to speak about the issue. Thank you very much for that. Dorcas.
Oh, thank you. I want to bring it down to the newsroom. I'm looking at the pitfalls of gender-sensitive reporting, and I'm sharing this from experience. When we say patriarchy thrives, it actually thrives, and it thrives everywhere, including in the newsroom. I am the gender editor at Nation Media Group. And when we started this desk, the idea was to bring the voice of these 50% that are always left out in our news stories, to bring them on board. Because as it is right now, media is struggling with the number of their audiences. So, and I just told my bosses, you know, for us to get that 50% or to increase the number of our consumers, then we need that 50% that we leave out. Because when you don't tell stories about these women, then they have no business consuming your product. But now, how do we bring this 50%? It means the people in the newsroom, the journalists, have to tell these stories. But unfortunately, and I don't know whether it's an unconscious bias, hardly would they tell those stories. And even when they tell those stories, hardly will you hear enough voices of the women. So one, it's because there are certain bits within the newsroom that have been assumed to be bits that can only be handled by men. Business stories, sports stories, political stories. If the president is having a rally, the editor, who unfortunately most of the times happens to be a man, will most likely assign a man. When a woman has accidentally, or the labor happened to come when she's walking on the streets of Nairobi, and she's giving birth on the streets and women are covering her with the lasos and all, the editor will be very fast. Where's Jane? Where's Mary? Someone please run. There's something happening down there. Okay. So because of this, you will not hear women's stories. How is the leadership of the newsroom? What is the composition? What percentage of women are in the decision-making tables? Who decides what story is the lead at today at 1 p.m. during the primetime news? Who decides what is the cover story of our newspaper tomorrow? It is men. You will rarely find a woman, a positive woman story on the cover. You'll find a woman on the cover if she's accused of murdering her husband. Okay? But a woman has launched something, done something big, no one will talk about them. So patriarchy. And we need to change this mindset. And at Nation Media Group, what we are doing right now, we've organized gender-sensitive reporting trainings, which we started in 2019. Unfortunately, when COVID happened, we didn't have one in 2020. We didn't have one in 2021. We had one last year. We hope to have one this year. And we are training everybody from the reporters to the most senior editor, just to tell their stories from a gender lens so that we kill this patriarchy in our storytelling. Thank you.
Dorcas, that was really brilliant. We would really like to come back. You already gave an insight on how you change and how do you want to invent the future of what stories are considered and who will be there in a moment. So I definitely am very curious to know, how do you change the future of who comes live and who gets more airtime, etc. But we'll hold on to that question for a moment. And Ruth, what has been your experience? And please don't limit it only to BBC. You come with a lot of experience elsewhere as well. So you as a journalist, and of course, we are also keen to listen to any insights from the BBC as well. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. As my colleagues who've spoken before me have said, I think the largest obstacle that we face is the way we frame our stories as the media, but also because of where we are at as society. We live in a very patriarchal society. And you will find, you know, even in the newsrooms that when you are looking for someone to comment on a story that has to do with passion, with cooking, with bringing up children, tell me, who will you go for? You'll go for a woman. Those are the places we are relegating women to comment, to speak on matters that are sometimes you just call very mundane. But when it comes to those very hard and technical, complex issues, you know, this can be handled better by a man. So it's in the way that we are tuned, I would say, perhaps, you know, the stereotypes and the biases that we continue to propagate as a medium. However, there are efforts that are being made, as Dorcas has spoken about, of being very intentional, of ensuring that we bring in diverse perspectives to our stories, that there are women who have gone ahead of us, who have broken the glass ceiling and are sitting in very key decision-making positions. Even in our newsrooms, I look at Dorcas, she's leading the gender desk. Look at Pamela Sitoni, your managing editor at the Nation. She's a woman. So we look at these women on who have gone ahead of us, broken the glass ceiling and trailed the blaze, and you tell yourself, I should not be stopped at just where I am. And ensuring that you have your tribe with you. I'm sitting here as the vice president of the Kenya Editors Guild. The board of the Kenya Editors Guild is fully elected by members, and the majority of them are women. It's about being focused on what you want to get and what stories we want to put out there. My own organization, the BBC, decided that we are going to be giving more space to women and children's stories and being very intentional about that, ensuring that we are no longer going to have males. We are going to ensure that the faces and the voices that we hear are more women voices on air. And how we do that is like even trying to track every month, having a report and ensuring that how many women's stories have we told, ticking the boxes and ensuring that they are there. But even as we do that, we still have to deal with the fact that women are stopped from speaking. When you go to places like, you know, the war zones that are in this region that we experience so often, the stories that you hear from the women are very heart-rending. And in the situations that they are in, you know, they're very emotional. They sometimes get victim blamed. You got into this situation because you attracted that sort of attention. Nobody wants to listen to the women's stories because of even the settings that they are coming from. So we still have a very long way to go, but I say we are making some progress, and keep encouraging our colleagues working out there that, as Dorcas mentioned, let's look at the place of gender-sensitive training, sensitivity training. What are some of the, what are the contexts that we are telling the story in? What are the nuances that we are not looking out for that we should be talking about? What are the behind the story or the behind the news sort of stories that we should go for, and continue doing that? Thank you.
Ruth, that was really brilliant. In fact, the point you made that your constituency or your tribe is with you is very encouraging. I was on the ground in Somalia, Somaliland a couple of times this year, and also inside Tigray, plus also at the Venezuelan-Colombian border. Even when there is interest sometimes to cover a story from the media, the backlash which such women will face later. And finally, you sometimes bring them their voices, but not necessarily identifying them as a real human being with a face and a name. You know, that's quite challenging sometimes for them. So I'm going to check with Will and our colleague whether we have any questions coming from the online participants. While we do that, I just want to check with all of you whether you have any burning question for any of the panel members on the issue we have touched. Of course, we'll be getting into the different dimensions of what they've been covering in a moment, but I just want to check whether you have any questions at this stage. All right, I can see a hand over there. Please go ahead.
Is there a microphone?
If you can identify yourself and also say if the question is for anyone in specific, that would be great.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nito Sharon. I'm a content producer. Sorry? Sorry. So like I said, my name is Nito Sharon. I'm a content producer. And my question goes to Madam Kimeu. You talked about inclusivity and where the motion at the table is girls and women. But I haven't had anyone talk about senior citizen and specifically women in that category, because when you talk about inclusivity, let me give an example in terms of digital or policy making. We only focus on women in urban setting or informal urban setting, and maybe arid and semi-arid. But the rural ones, for example, those in maybe in Nyeri, somewhere in Kipkelion, no one is talking about them. So I'll wish maybe to get a better understanding on how that is working. Thank you very much.
That's a very good point. A reminder not to leave anyone behind. But I think that's a question directly to you. Please go ahead. Yes.
Well, thanks very much for that question. And you're 100% spot on. You know, part of the issue, and that's kind of what I was talking about with intersectionality, is that we're talking about women who are disabled, women who have mental health issues, older women, women in various different areas. Like we fail sometimes to talk about women in the breadth and various layers in which they exist. If we're talking about sexual lives, now we have authors who are putting out significant content on various different issues. We're finding there is more diversity in how these stories are being told in various different areas. So for reporters like ourselves, everyone on this panel and throughout the continent region, we do have to work that much harder to make sure we're not only looking at women through such a narrow lens. It does them a disservice. I used to work for an outlet where you know, every time there was a story, we wanted a story, it could be on health, it could be on a variety of different issues, you know, you would find them directing us to go to a certain area, an informal settlement, to look for that story. And one day I asked, I was like, isn't this portraying such a skewed version of what the reality in Kenya is? There's so many different economic classes. There's so many different ways in which people exist in this country that I feel are not portrayed. And so what I'm saying is, in the newsrooms, it does fall to us as journalists to question, who are we speaking with? Like, you know, in my emails, many days I'll have many pitches about drought, many pitches about, you know, climate. Many times they could be on a certain slant. So we do rely on various different actors. We rely heavily on experts. We rely heavily on academics. The people producing these reports do us such a service when they make them more nuanced in areas. I would love to know about women having schizophrenia while carrying a pregnancy, a story that I saw on CNN as Equals. I would love to report on that story. But we do count, it's a whole system. It's a symbiotic system in which we don't exist and carry stories on our own as reporters. We reach out. That's why we build these communities, because when I see that pitch in my email, I'm quick to flag it to my editorial team. I thankfully come from an editorial team that has many women on it. And that's been such a blessing in terms of not having to fight to explain or do the heavy lifting to show why are these stories important. I don't have to live every day trying to explain the reality. It's an intrinsic understanding, and that's something that I appreciate. So when we're talking about diversity, these are very real issues. But at the same time, we as Black African women reporters, I will say we're pushing back on many fronts. Like sometimes look at the end product and be like, it's not where it needs to be. 100%. We are within a system that still favors that still has imbalances in terms of getting these voices seen in a nuanced and full human being kind of way, for people to look at us at, you know, eye length and not either downwards or, you know, through a twisted lens. And this is the work that's going on. So I completely agree. Would I love to see more reporting on older women? They're so hidden from our sight. We have so many ideas, this laden with so many stereotypes. I'd love to see women more than just in Nairobi, but it is a collective effort. And that's why the challenging really does play a part. It's more like we've seen a lot of reporting from Nairobi. Can we have, you know, a Northeastern women? What are they doing? What's interesting on that front? And depicting them in the variety of different ways. I've said women are farmers, they're filmmakers, they're CEOs, they are, you know, in entertainment. And all of these things matter so much. And I'm grateful now that organizations, I mean, at least I've seen quite a bit of shift in terms of how development reporting is perceived and the breadth that's allowed to exist. So I think as reporters, we have a duty to take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Actually, one of the questions which we'll be getting into in a moment after we take the question from there is actually, in addition to getting some sound bites, how do we actually involve girls and women more actively? How do we give them an agency in the coverage you do? But I'm going to come to that question in a moment to all of you after taking a question from that side. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. I am Charles. Just first of all, to recognize the great work that you're doing in your different respects. So my question is, how do you tell, or what's your experience in bringing out the unique issues that women face in a crisis setting? For example, whenever we see these stories on our TVs, we just see that there's need for food. But we still appreciate the fact that women need sanitary towels and other specific needs. So what's your experience in telling those stories? And still on the same breath, what's your experience in follow-up? Because what usually happens, especially us who live in Nairobi, who are in a privileged setting, we see a crazy story in Marsabit today. And I think the Nairobi people will appreciate that maybe this is just a one-week problem, because they will not sit on the TVs again till after maybe a couple of years down the road and they see people are still suffering. So what's your experience in following up these stories while maintaining the dignity of the girl and the woman? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles. Actually, I'm planning to add my question to that point, because I think both the questions raised issues around invisible groups, you know, people who fall through the cracks sometimes, or sometimes invisible issues such as mental health, you know, the issues related to, you know, sanitation and all range of things that often don't get covered very well. So my question would be, just building on what Charles was asking, involving girls and women in reporting and storytelling. How can we involve them more actively, not just for sound bites, and how to give them more agency and get their inputs and also solutions which they can tell the rest of the world? Start with Ruth.
Thank you, Umi, and Charles, for your question. And I'd like to say that it's still a challenge of balancing what is the story that I'm going to put out there in a period where you're working with competing interests and competing stories. On a day when there's a breaking news story, for instance, you know, like the Johannesburg floods, a fire has happened, and we have a woman who is struggling with putting food on their table. Sometimes you balance and see which is the story that is going to bring me the numbers, and we have to be real to the reality that is what it is. That is what the industry has become. We no longer have the luxury of, like, you know, getting deep down into more developmental and more human interest stories in a time when you're even strapped for resources. And I'm talking about this from a perspective of, you know, having worked here in the local media and also with the international media, not specifically to my organization, but all through. Those are the challenges that the media faces, that you have to sell, you have to pay the staff that you have. You are strapped with resources. You have to ask yourself, which is the story that I'm going to tell that will bring the clicks? Because I'm sorry to say, we're in a period where clickbaiting is selling, is helping us get our stories out there. We don't have masses of pages or acres and acres of airspaces to give space for some of the stories. However, organizations are coming up. Look at Nation with their gender desk. Look at the BBC, for instance, with the Africa Eye, with various genres. And so we are going into specialization. We are going into having what we can say branding or packaging or different products for different markets. And that's where you will find sometimes stories fall through the crack because you're following a certain story that is what you think more relevant, more closer, and more like, resonates even more with your audience than the one that you think is most important. So the decisions are made sometimes under very difficult circumstances that at some point you'll just put out that story as a filler instead of a whole page. Why is that decision made? It is because of the closeness, the adaptability of the story to your readers, and all that. Perhaps it is sounding more technical, but also just to tell you that the numbers in the newsrooms are also dwindling. You find that you have one reporter to work on 4 or 5 stories in a day, and therefore some stories are put in the back burner and we will come back to them later. So those are some of the challenges that we encounter, and I can imagine the same is the experience with my colleagues sitting here with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. That was a really great start. And Dorcas, you already gave us insight of what really goes on inside the rooms where decisions are made, who should be covered, what story should be covered. How much of it is a challenge to really ensure that much more active agency of girls and women are there in the stories you tell? How do you do that?
I think, so excuse me. My team and I made a decision from the word go that it's very hard. Like this digital transformation, most media houses are moving to the digital platform because that's where everyone is. So when you open, for example, the nation.africa website, there's the homepage. It is very hard to find a woman's story being placed on the homepage. And she's talking about the clicks, and that's what everyone is looking for. Everyone is looking for money. So what story will bring us more eyeballs? And more eyeballs means, of course, more money, if you translate it. So with my team, we decided the gender stories or the women and girls stories that we do should be stories of impact. Stories of impact in the sense that we will tell, this is a follow-up to the question he asked about, they read a story about a woman suffering in the floods in Nyando. So they'll read about her today. So we just talk about the floods, and that the woman will say, watoto wameenda, ng'ombe yote nakufa, nini. And then beyond that, we don't hear about that woman again. We don't know about the menstrual hygiene. We don't know if she's a breastfeeding mother, what happens to her. If she's a new mother, what is happening to the infant? So what we do after such a story, of course, we do a follow-up story. And if there's impact, for example, we tell the story of this woman whose house has been flooded, and therefore everything has been carried away. She has nothing. Maybe a church or some NGO will come and rescue them. Yes, we will tell this story. We will not leave that woman at that. There's a follow-up because, at least we have reporters across the region, and that's with most of the mainstream media. So follow-up, what happened after that? Where are these women? So what are the issues they're facing? So we'll go, you find the women probably they're in a church somewhere. That's where all the women have been put in this church. The men have been taken to a different locality altogether. So what's the issues that these women are facing here? So we go, talk to these women. What are the challenges? Of course, the children probably don't have food. The ones who are breastfeeding need to be, to eat nutritious food so they're able to get enough milk for the children. They don't have sanitary towels. How are they managing the sanitary towels? If, for example, there are pregnant women who need to go to the clinic, what is happening to them? When we tell this story, our hope is that the stakeholders, the policymakers, and everyone who is concerned on this particular matter will be able to follow up. And if that happens, again, we do a follow-up and we tell a story, sort of a celebratory story, that these women, at least now the ones who need to go to the clinic are going to the clinic. Someone has donated sanitary towels for them. Someone has decided to relocate them from the school to a new or a better place where, you know, they can live comfortably with their children, and even to reunite them with their spouses. Yeah, so impact to me matters more than the eyeballs when it comes to women and girls stories, because hardly, you see, for example, I will tell a story. We have a socialite in Kenya called Vera Sidika. So I'll write a headline, Vera flies to LA. Of course, everyone will want to read it, isn't it? Everyone. But if I write a story, for example, of teen girl who got a child during her exam, scores an A. I'm not sure. Scores an A means she's performed very well in school and she did her exams while pregnant. Not very many people will read that, will be interested in that story. So you find that most stories that touch on women and girls, and let's just be honest with ourselves, most such stories will not get you the number of eyeballs you want. And that's why you'll find, especially this upcoming online media, having some crazy headlines. So the headline will pull you to the story. Then when you read the story, there's really nothing. Where's the story? But you've already opened the story, you've read it, you've given them the numbers. As opposed to mine, that will be in-depth. I've walked along with this girl, telling me how she sat for the exams, leaves the exam room, goes home, breastfeeds the baby, sits to read for the, probably with what are they called? Those paraffin lamps. She's reading at night. In the morning, she has to express some milk. She doesn't even have a proper bottle for expressing the milk. Probably she doesn't even have a free to milk. Just taking us through her journey. But you find people are not interested. Yet this is a very interesting story, telling the story of this girl who is so determined to pursue her education and change her life and that of her people.
Thank you, Dorcas. Franny, I'll come to you in a moment to ask whether there are questions from the online participants, but after I take some quick reactions from the other panel members. Couple of minutes,
yeah, thank you for that. From my experience, because I love going to the field. I love going to tell the stories uko mashinani. So first of all, I'll go with a story angle. For example, I've gone to Turkana to produce a story about the traditional bathing cushion. That is my favorite story several years later. So I go to Turkana, but again, I find another story angle. I'm going to see how women are delivering from in health facilities instead of delivering at home. But again, you go and find there is this teenage street child, an underage who is pregnant. So I'll do my story about women and how they are going to hospital. And I'll also do the other story about how life is as a homeless, teenage, pregnant, woman. So I'll look at all those angles. And then I must also confess that I'm not, I don't like hard news because, he said, she said, they concluded, they alluded, and it's done. I love feature stories because they are in-depth. I will take time and produce a good, a good story that I will give all voices. It will give perspective. I'll ensure that I include each and every voice. Unlike a 1 minute, 2 minutes, but if I give you a 10-minute story, I have actually included all the voices. So also, it comes also to international organization. You have called journalists and you want the story by tomorrow. They will give you, they said, he said, they concluded, they launched, but if you give me time, I'll go and do a really, really good story. And I can also give an example of now bypassing, the clickbaits. I produced a story about the plight of children in Nairobi as they access education. And while I was producing that story, it was during World Cup. Definitely, if I go and request for airtime, all the eyes will be on World Cup. And I wanted my story to be seen. So if I take my story after World Cup, once I remember I was told, okay, your story will come immediately after the game. And it was a game that it was really a big deal. Definitely people will be discussing who scored, who missed opportunities. They'll not even be listening to my story. So I was like, I'm not in a hurry. Go and finish your World Cup. I will bring my story after the World Cup. You know, after all the noise is over, then I will bring my story. And it doesn't even have, the story doesn't have to be listened to or watched by 10,000, 1,000 people, because it's about impact. Even if one person will listen to that story and it will impact them, for me, I'm home and dry. I also produced another story. It was about teenagers who are going back to school. And for me, I will share that story on radio, and I will go, I have a personal website, I'll put the story there. I'll go on my Facebook. I'll even follow you on your WhatsApp groups and share that story there, because I know someone will, you know, you have to read and listen to that story. And I remember someone came to my inbox on Facebook and said, this was a father. And he said, my daughter got pregnant and I had said, you are not going to school. But after listening to that second chance, I gave my daughter a second chance. For me, whether it's 40 people who read, or one person who read, as long as there is someone who read or who watched and it impacted them. Thank you.
So that was really great. And also the point you made about going beyond the headlines and going beyond the first 30 seconds to get into the details. And also thank you for sharing your personal insights into this. And you make a very strong point about, should journalists be just reporting? Should they also be getting into constructive campaigns sometimes? Thank you for bringing this. Carolyn, what's your take on this? Yeah.
Well, it's always a fine balance, right? As for the line between, you know, where journalists should be on that, I'm also constantly navigating what that means on a daily basis. So it's a daily journey. But instead of that, let me kind of briefly address Charles, who asked something super important and you know, something that I think about every day, about follow-ups and doing the story when nobody cares or that wave has moved on. I think we all remember when there was a woman who was sexually attacked in her car after an accident with a border rider, right? Many women, I think if you're a Kenyan woman or even just an African, like I think if you watch that video, my God, I don't know about you guys, but like me, my friends, like we cried over that video. And I think later on I've always wondered about that woman, like, where is she? Is she doing okay? Like, you know, but beyond that, beyond her as a person, I later then saw a story in local media about a number of the assailants having not made it through, like a number of them having been let out of custody. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that I wondered how many went on, like how many actually, was anybody actually prosecuted for that, etc. It is our job to keep these stories. At the end of the day, public outrage might be the reason to cover a certain story, but I think that we are all stretched thin. If you talk to many Kenyans right now, we are carrying the burden of lack of systems working on our own shoulders. So you find it's up to citizens to raise their voices about, you know, the next thing that has happened, the sexual assault that happened here, or the taxes are going up here, oh, who died under what circumstances. So citizens are bearing a very heavy weight. And I think that that means in some senses, there's a national trauma that keeps going unaddressed. And I think that that's why we have to, because we're so stretched in, we have to systematize the care. Like we have to do the follow-up stories. Like I did a story on the domestic workers in Saudi Arabia while it was still hot, you know, while people were still discussing it. But I think we first, you know, I have to say I credit local media and like this particular outlets that have been doing a fantastic work on that, as far as looking at the policies that allow this to happen in Saudi Arabia, in Kenya. Let's not discuss this issue. Oh, the workers are dying, they're being sexually abused, but why is this happening? What allows this to happen? And constantly sending out those media requests to government, whether or not there's a response, you've got to keep sending out those requests, because the message that sends is, listen, there are still citizens care, there's, you know, media cares, we're looking at this, we're following this, and then doing a follow-up story. Like I did a follow-up story, I believe, at some point earlier this year, late last year. The issue has died down. Again, like there's no flurry around it. You might not get the hot clicks or the views. But if there is that scope, I would say as a reporter, still pitch that story, still do the follow-up story, and find out, has government acted on the things that it said that it would be doing? That's what I mean by systematizing the care. Like, don't wait only for the flurry of things. I mean, it's definitely because of the concerns we've talked about, that's a factor at the top of the decision-making levels. That's a factor we have to think about. Will this story have any traction? But at the same time, there's also the media responsibilities and like trying to balance that out where it's possible. So to Charles, yes, I think that's such an important question. We're all quite spread thin, but I think we should continue to do this and like to move these conversations forward, even when it's not the hot thing to do.
I can relate with all of what you've said, but especially one point you made about you gave the credit to the local reporters and others who were just bringing the story out. It didn't get much traction. I can relate with that very quickly. I'm a humanitarian worker, and what we know very well is that the first responders to a crisis or an issue are always the local people. COVID-19 also taught us, and also some of the war zones continue to teach us with limited access. Sometimes they are the only responders. So I can definitely relate with some of the things which you said now. I will be coming to that question once again. What is the special story you believe you did, and why is it so special, in a moment? But before I do that, I want to check with Frenny whether we have any questions from our online participants. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Definitely. We have a question from online that's coming from Ranel Sykes. And the question is directed to Ruth Nesoba as the Vice President of the Editors Guild. And Ranel asks, with the understanding that there are few women in decision-making roles, what are the conversations happening among editors around gender-sensitive reporting? Is it simply a box to check?
That's a very good and easy question, Ruth. Please go ahead.
It is indeed, and a very difficult one, but I'm happy I'm sitting next to a member of the Kenya Editors Guild, Dorcas, and a fellow editor here, that we have lots of networking opportunities amongst ourselves as Kenya Editors Guild. We have reached out to organizations with like mind, for instance, the Association of Media Women in Kenya, the Journalists for Human Rights, JHR, and come up with training that is specifically meant to give lots of lessons to our members in terms of just, teaching them a bit about, gender sensitivity, about the importance of accuracy and fact checking, about the importance of seeking consent before you speak to a woman, for instance, who is in a situation that may be deemed to end up stigmatizing her. First, seek their consent to speak to them before you just go out. Look at ways of ethical reporting, not going to embarrass or not going to prejudice the case studies that you're speaking to. And we have mentors also within the Kenya Editors Guild. We're coming up with a mentorship program. I know within the Association of Media Women, AMWIC, they also do have a mentorship program. Lourdes is one of, I think, a mentee or a mentor. And we are already building the blogs. It may not be perfect because, it's always work in progress. We are hoping we'll get there, but as more of our members get this, mentorship opportunities, they get this sort of training, I can say that the standard of journalism is improving. There is less of that kind of sort of tabloidish reporting in our newspapers, in the mainstream. At least I can speak of that. And we hope that in due course, it can get better. But as the question was, if you can just repeat it again, Freddie? Yeah, we are deliberate about it. And as Dorcas also said, if there's a story that involves, for instance, I mean, a big national sort of talking point story, if you are in a position to get more women voices into that story, go and interview women so that then we can bring them to the table of the discussion. Ensure that the stories that we are putting out there about women are not just about, the stereotypes sort of stories, the biases sort of stories. Ensure that you give them a platform where we amplify their voices, where they tell their own stories through impactful journalism, through human human stories, human angle stories that can bring out a story that more members will, the reader will be able to associate and relate to that story and say, hey, wait a minute, that's me that they're talking about. So I will definitely read that story, the impact that you create in that person. And it's not just ticking boxes, the conversations are being had. And I can attest to this, and members can also speak to that.
Thank you, Ruth. That's a positive note. Dorcas, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I could add something to that. Beyond just telling the stories, now I'll maybe just touch on the women, the women editors themselves, because she asked about whether there are conversations going on. I'll give an example of the Standard Group, which is one of our big media houses in Kenya. They have a women's forum. They actually even have a president for that women's forum. And because of that, amongst themselves, the women in that particular news, they've ensured that at least they have, not in the very senior positions, but at least they have some women in some decision-making spaces within the newsroom. At Nation, where I work, we have a group, we call it the Women in News. And we always make noise in this group and challenge each other and motivate each other, so that when Nation was restructuring recently, of course, women didn't get those very high positions. The highest is the group managing editor. But we have quite a number of men who are lead editors for different bits within the newsroom. And to us, that is a plus. So how we challenge each other now as women, once we've gotten these positions, we tell each other, now go out there and prove yourself. So so that I don't let people think that it's just a token. Dorcas has just been placed there so that we say, oh, there's a woman in charge of gender and education. What is Dorcas doing there? So I have to prove myself. And so we challenge each other every day. Please, girl, go girl, prove yourself. I challenge them, the vice president and the president of the Editors Guild, who are both women, prove yourselves, show them that we can also do it, and encourage each other every day.
Good point about challenging and speaking truth to power. Thank you very much, Dorcas and Ruth, for that. I am sure that we can go on for another 2 more days, but we have only about 7 or 8 minutes left. So I'm going to put you actually on the spot and give you not more than 1 minute. And I do have a question, maybe 90 seconds each. Some of you already touched on it. Think for a moment and tell us, what's the most impactful story you have done? And most importantly, why do you think it was impactful? Okay. Unfortunately, we have limited time, 90 seconds. I can see Dorcas, please go ahead. Yeah, we'll start with you.
Let me start. I did not do it, but my reporter did it, and it's something close to what she did. We did a story about this school that has admits girls who have given birth, okay, the teen mothers. And it's a unique school that's just for that, for the teenage mothers. Because unfortunately, Kenya's law allows teenage mothers back to school, unlike Tanzania. But these girls, when they go back, are stigmatized. So we get stigma from their classmates. We get stigma from some of the teachers. So this particular school was just created for that purpose. And so we did stories of these girls narrating their experience going back to school and being happy that now they'll be able to take care of their children going forward. So this story had such a great impact because once we told it and followed up, we found that there were now girls, teenage mothers who were trying to get admission to that school. And beyond that, they got a delegation from Uganda who came to benchmark and see how this has managed to readmit these girls and how they're managing in class at the back of their mind, knowing that they have children at home waiting for them. Mm-hmm. Me, that is something. Because teenage mother getting pregnant is not the end of her life. So we need to give them and show them that there's a future, even as we mentor them and guide them on the disadvantages of getting pregnant while you're young. But we should not now just criminalize what they have done. It's not a crime. It could have been an accident, could have been naive, could have been, they didn't have sanitary towels and someone offered the sanitary and they got pregnant. So that's not the end of life. There's life beyond that.
Thank you. That's really brilliant. Some might think criminalizing that story might get you more clicks, but you decided to do something else. So well done with that. Thank you very much. Look.
I have quite a number, but there is this one.
And you get
one.
90 seconds. I'm
yes,
sorry.
with my 90 seconds. I did a story in Turkana about how women in Turkana prefer giving birth while squatting or sitting instead of lying in the lithotomy position where most health workers prefer. So what makes this story special is that these traditional birthing cushions were adopted into the health facilities. Wow. So when a woman, instead of that woman giving birth at home, they can still go to hospital and choose, you see, and squat. It gave them agency. You can go to hospital and choose, me, I want to sleep. For me, I want to squat or to kneel. But the end game is you have given birth in a health facility. And as a solution-focused journalist, it's not just about, positive advocacy. We also look at the challenges of that solution. And one of the challenges was that they had maternity shelters where a woman who comes from far will come and stay in that maternity shelter. And then when time comes for you to deliver, you just walk into the health facility. But these maternity shelters were not functional because they were funded by development partners. And when development partners packed their bags, the maternity shelters closed. So the county government decided to fund some of the maternity shelters, which was also a plus, and they added the traditional birthing cushions to more health facilities. And also I won an award. That is a plus.
Brilliant, congratulations. Thank you, Lourdes. And I think I can relate that point that was made about especially reporting and that solution-based reporting without actually glamorizing the point which Matilda made on the first panel. So thank you. Caroline.
Right, thank you. And I will keep within the 90 seconds. Rather than being the most important story I've told, I mean, honestly, to be, quite frank, all the stories that I take on matter to me at, to some point and significantly. But I will say I recently began looking into some online sexist communities and how these were having a ramification for women. And part of that has been, I actually stumbled across a workshop, a report that was suggesting that the influence of these online communities and how they're elbowing women out of online spaces was under scrutinized by organizations. And so when I started pursuing the story, it became quite difficult because even the researchers behind the report were scared to speak about their findings because of the kind of online backlash that would exist. And I've received some already myself. The story is to come, and it had to take a different format just because sources were scared to speak, etc. I think the reason it was important for me is because ultimately, speaking about gendered subjects, and especially sensitive gendered subjects, sometimes there's a reason why stories are underreported. It could be because as women reporters, I've seen male reporters report on the same issue without personal backlash or personal attacks. But now, there's always a way of understanding that intimidating people or, turning the lens on the person trying to bring issues to light is a way of trying to suppress these stories. So I think it was important in the sense of let's continue to have these conversations. It's not always easy. We don't always have the perfect data sets. Many of us on this continent as reporters, editors, we're working where we have to make inferences, where we have to do more of the heavy lifting to bring some of these stories together. So I think let's not allow the multiple barriers to telling these important gendered subjects to stop us from doing so.
That's great, Caroline. Thank you very much. And also your point on the data on the numbers may not be perfect, but sometimes our audience is not trying to memorize the statistics, but they're really trying to listen to what it means in that context. Thank you very much. And Ruth, either a story you did or you deploy people, you commission stories and something you believe is one of your favorite stories, and most importantly, why?
So for me, first I'll talk about my own. It's a story about child carers. Do we ever pay attention to them? And most of them are young girls, about 15, 16 years or even younger, who have lost both parents, are orphaned, and are left taking care of their siblings, staying with them in mostly the informal settlements that we have. having to go to school, but also having to worry about when we get back, what will my young siblings be taking, and what, thinking about tomorrow, taking on adult responsibilities, and at the same time, they should still be pursuing their education and all that. I did that as one of my first stories when I joined the BBC many years ago, but it was quite impactful in the sense that out of that, a policy was made because the director of education was there, and also out of that, an academic research paper was done. So it still remains memorable for me up to now. In my position as commissioning and also a deployments editor, one of the stories that still lingers on my mind is the story about child stealers in Kenya. It led to the arrest of the people who are behind the child stealing racket here in the country. And just recently, they were sentenced for having participated in that. I can't take the credit for that because it came as started off as an Africa Eye investigative story, but I got the reporter on the desk in Nairobi to seek for reactions, to go to the places when the police were coming up with, they were taking up a swoop to go and get the people who are involved in that. And so, just keeping in touch with the authorities when they're going to carry out that swoop, and also the arrest when the court cases started and everything, staying with the story and developing until the people are convicted. So it's a very memorable story that still remains on my mind.
Thank you, Ruth. That was really powerful. I have seen many hands going up in the room, but unfortunately, I've been told I got about another 4 minutes to close. We can't close 2 minutes. Yeah, to close 1 minute. Okay. So I encourage you. That's even better because that will give you more chance to interact with our panel members when they are there with you for lunch and at the break. So thank you very much. So I'm not planning to summarize anything in the next 1 minute, but I just want to, first of all, a big thank you to all our panel members, a big round of applause to each one of you. Thank you for being here, and also for thank you being honest in these conversations. I also want to thank our camera people and our sound engineers. Thank you for broadcasting to the rest of the world. Thank you very much. And Will and Frenny and One World Media for your support and considering to prioritize this topic. Barasa and my own colleague Evelyn and my team from Plan International, they are somewhere here. You'll be hearing more from them in the afternoon. I just want to leave and close with a couple of observations. Earlier this year, I was traveling to Somaliland with Daniel Letter. Daniel Letter won a Pulitzer Prize for photography once, and he also won the World Press Photo. And one of the biggest challenges we are facing right now, when you look at the biggest crisis that is impacting the humanity right now, is hunger, with more than 870 million people going to bed hungry. And we also know when it comes to some of these crises, attention is the most important currency. So we were trying to excite journalists. We were trying to get photographers onto the ground. Finally, Daniel decided to come. Daniel told me something very profound, which is not his words, but something he reminded me was, there is a story all over the crisis zones. And if your story is not printable, it is not close enough. He was remembering Robert Capa, the famous photographer, who famously said, if your picture is not good enough, you're not close enough. So that's a first thing I remember from that. And you reminded the importance of going to the field and going to the front lines and to the real people who are living through crisis and other things. And the second one was, you clearly reminded about going beyond the sound bites and, giving them more space, especially girls and women, to allow them to tell the story. And you clearly articulated that it won't happen accidentally and through a timetable. You need to be intentional, making sure that women are telling the stories and you are giving them space to tell the stories as eyewitness accounts and other things. And most importantly, this has to also happen at the leadership and management level if you want to bring a culture change. And there was a very good point also about some of the invisible groups of people and invisible needs, such as, sanitary items for girls and women, which often fall through the cracks in all needs assessments with aid agencies do. And also mental health and psychosocial needs, which came up, emotional care and support in those settings. And most importantly, looking also for solutions. So I want to thank once again the organizers and each one of you. And most importantly, my audience in the room and those who joined online. Thank you very much. Thank you.